The guy has forgotten the entire time until Pharaoh has a dream and says, okay, I need someone to interpret this dream. And the guy who's his cupbearer says to him, I know a dude who can interpret dreams. His name is Joseph. He's languishing in the prison. If he's still alive, let's go get him. They get him. And then what happens is Joseph interprets this dream to the Pharaoh and says at the end, you need some wise counsel to make sure that this plan gets enacted in a proper way. The dream is that there will be 7 years of famine and 7 years of plenty before that. Joseph says you need to prepare and you need a wise person to take care of it. So guess what happens? He gets the job. He gets all the way up before Pharaoh. In fact, Pharaoh makes him number 2 in the entire country of Egypt. So here's Joseph. He goes down, he comes back up. He goes down further, he comes back up. He goes down further, he comes back up. And now he's all the way up at the top of the heap of the land of Egypt. He's at the highest point above any other person in the whole land except for the Pharaoh, the king himself. And it's even better because after the 7 years of plenty are done, the 7 years of famine begin, and the famine extends all the way to his family back in Canaan, the land of Israel. And his family then says, we need to go get food. And so Joseph's brothers get sent down to Egypt to get food. They come down to Egypt, and guess what they do when they meet him? They don't recognize him, but they bow down to him. And so now we get this final picture of Joseph's journey where he is finally up above his brothers, where they come and they bow down to him. And he doesn't let them know who he is, and he plays a little bit of a game with them to see if they're remorseful until finally they prove that, yes, they are remorseful. And then he steps forward and he says, I'm your brother. I'm your brother. And look at this verse in Genesis 45, verses 4 through 10. Joseph said to his brothers, come close to me. When they'd done so, he said, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now don't be distressed, and don't be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there's been a famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will not be plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then, this is beautiful. So then it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me a father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire house. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, this is what your son Joseph says. God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me. Don't delay. This beautiful picture of Joseph being able to say to his brothers, you didn't even send me here. God sent me here so that I could play a role in saving you and saving all these people. After Jacob, his father, dies, they all move down to Egypt. And after Jacob dies, the brothers are worried. What's Joseph going to do now? Now that the father is dead, is he going to enact his revenge on us now? And so flip to chapter 50, verse 18. His brothers then came and threw themselves down before him. We're your slaves, they said. But Joseph said to them, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? This is beautiful. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children. And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Jot this down. What people intended for harm, God didn't allow. God didn't just say, okay, whatever. God intended it for good. There's a purpose in the harm, apparently. There's a purpose in the pain. What people intended to do damage to Joseph and to everybody else in the family, what his brothers intended for harm, God intended. He had a purpose for that. He had a plan for that, that would bring about something amazing, that would bring about the saving of many people's lives. It wasn't just that God allowed a bad thing to happen and then later on made it good. It was that God said, this is a bad thing they're trying to do, but I'm going to use it now. I'm going to set this boy on a path that leads him inevitably to something great. God intended it for good. But what if on that road, Joseph decided at one point he was just going to give up? What if somewhere along that path, Joseph said, God's given up on me. He's not with me anymore. If He were with me, I wouldn't be in Egypt. If God were with me, I wouldn't be in jail. If God were with me, I wouldn't be facing this trouble I'm facing. I wouldn't be dealing with these relationships I'm dealing with. I wouldn't have this pain that I've got. If God were with me, and yet God was with him the whole time. And because he was faithful in Potiphar's house, God lifted him up. And then he was framed. If God were with me, I wouldn't be framed for doing the right thing, but God was with him. And because he was faithful, God lifted him up. And then the man didn't tell Pharaoh about the dream situation. He languished for 2 more years. If God were with me, he would have told Pharaoh, but God was with him. And 2 years later, he lifted him up, higher than anybody else. This is the thing we need to realize. That even though what people intend for harm, God intends for good, this next principle is just too difficult for us sometimes. It's that the journey from harm to good follows a path called faithful endurance. Endurance is the ability to keep going in the face of what looks like harm. You know, we could stop right here. I could eliminate the Bible passages. I could set all this stuff to the side. I could just take a purely secular, Oprah Winfrey, Dr. Phil kind of approach and tell you something here that is the central tenet of all self-help texts. It goes like this. What feels like harm to you actually works out for your benefit. I'll just use an example from my personal life. I hate running. I think running is for crazy people who like to feel pain. They're like masochistic, and they just enjoy that. That's my personal feeling, because when I run, my legs burn, my lungs burn, my chest, my heart burns, my head begins to pound, and that's only the first 100 yards. And so when I'm doing that kind of stuff, I don't understand what other people are thinking when they say, oh, I love running, it feels so good. I think they're nuts. There's something missing, something disconnected in the brain. Or maybe I'm not realizing what's going on because I know the truth. The truth is that I have a family history of heart disease, and if I don't do some type of physical activity,